Vesna had carried coals through the back passages of Frostmere Hold 1,000 times, and not once had they made her the keeper of a secret that could burn the whole pack to the ground. But here she was, crouched in the dark behind the antler doors, with a warming pan going cold in her hands, listening to the alpha confess that his own wedding would kill the bride. She had only come to feed the side braziers before the binding. That was her work, her whole small place in the world. Keep the long hearth fed, keep the great fire breathing. Be the one nobody noticed, because a fire nobody notices is a fire that never goes out. She had slipped through the servants' passage with her coals, the way she had 1,000 nights before, and she had heard voices on the other side of the doors, and she had frozen, the way she had been freezing since she was a child. The old instinct that whispered, "If you go very still, the world will forget you are there." It had kept her alive in a snowbank once. It kept her alive in the corridors of a pack that had never decided whether she belonged to it. "I can't bind her, Garrick." The alpha's voice was low and ruined, and it did not sound like the voice that gave orders on the wall. "If I take Sabine to mate, I take her with me into the cold. The bond won't anchor to a living wolf. It will anchor to a dying one, and it will drag her down the same road it's dragging me, one frozen inch at a time, and she will not even know why. Then we tell her father the truth, and watch Caramore name us Kerstad and the borderlands open by spring. Half the pack already whispers that something is wrong with their alpha. The moment they smell it for certain, the challenges begin. The Skarn are dead, but the Skarn had friends, and friends have long memories. A long, scraping breath. If I refuse the binding, the alliance breaks and we go to a war. We cannot win without a war leader who can last past the thaw. If I complete it, I murder a girl whose only crime is being born useful to her father. Tell me which of those a good alpha is supposed to choose. Tell me, because I have stopped being able to find it." Garrick said nothing. There was nothing to say. Vesna pressed her back against the cold stone and tried to make her heart go quiet. She should not have heard this. People did not survive hearing things like this. A hearthkeeper, a stray, a wolfless girl pulled half dead out of the snow more than 20 winters past and kept on out of pity, did not get to know that the alpha of Frostmere was dying by the inch. She thought, distantly, that she should creep back the way she had come and forget every word, and feed her braziers, and keep her head down, and live. But in the great hall beyond the doors, the drums had already started. She did not remember crossing the passage. She remembered the long hearth opening up before her, vast and gold and packed shoulder to shoulder with every wolf in the hold. The eternal flame she tended roaring at the center of the binding circle, like a living thing glad of the crowd. She remembered Sabine, standing tall and lovely, in pale gray, her chin high, her eyes already frightened in the way of someone being handed across a table to a stranger. She remembered Lucan stepping into the circle from the other side, broad and dark and beautiful, and so tired that Vesna could not understand how 300 wolves failed to see it, the gray creeping along the edge of his jaw, like frost spreading on a window the way he carried his right hand a little stiff and curled, as though the winter had reached his fingers and made a home there. Orla, the lore mistress, lifted the binding cord above the fire. "Let the flame witness," she called in the old words, "and let the flame accept." Vesna's whole life was that flame. She knew its every mood, its sulks and its hungers, the way it leaned when the wind came down the smoke hole, the way it never ever guttered because she never once let it. She did not decide to move. Her feet decided for her. She walked out of the servants' arch and into the open hall, past the front ranks who turned to stare, past Garrick whose face drained white, straight into the binding circle where no hearthkeeper had ever had the right to set so much as a toe, and she sank to her knees at the eternal flame and closed both bare hands around its burning heart. It went out, not low, out, dark. The great fire of Frostmere Hold, which had not died in 200 years through siege and famine and the long bad winters the elders still spoke of in hushed voices, collapsed all at once into smoke and a smell of wet ash. And Vesna knelt in the sudden gloom with her hands unburned and the whole pack's binding broken open around her like a dropped cup. That no one breathed. 300 wolves, and not one breath in the whole golden ruin of the hall. She lifted her head. Lucan was staring at her across the dead fire, and she waited for the rage, for the order, for the hands of the guards. His eyes were the color of slate, just before rain, and they moved over her face slowly, and she watched the precise moment he understood that a nobody had just put out the sacred fire and stopped his wedding, and that she could not possibly have done it by accident, and that there was only one thing in this world she could have overheard that would have made a frightened stray brave enough to try. He knows that I know, she thought, and her stomach dropped through the floor. Gods keep me. He knows that I know. Take her. The voice cracked the silence like ice underfoot, and it was Sabine's father, his face dark with insult. Take the stray to the cells. The flame rejected my daughter, and this creature is the cause. Hands closed on Vesna's arms, hard enough to bruise, and hauled her up. She did not feel them. She did not look away from the Alpha, and the Alpha, alone in all that breathless dark, did not look away from her, and that was how it began. The cell beneath Frostmere was the coldest room Vesna had ever been put in, which was saying a great deal for a girl who had been born in a snowbank, and she sat on the stone bench with her knees drawn up and waited to be killed. It seemed the most likely ending. She had touched the sacred flame, which was forbidden. She had walked into a binding circle, which was forbidden. She had put out the eternal fire in front of 300 wolves and an allied Alpha, which no one had ever thought to forbid, because no one in 2 centuries had been mad enough to do it. She turned her hands over and looked at them as though they belonged to someone else. The skin was whole, not a blister, not a redness, not a mark. She had held the heart of a living fire in her bare palms, and it had felt like cupping cool spring water, and she made herself stop looking. She thought instead about the snow. She always did when she was frightened. The first thing she remembered in all the world was the cold and the white and the certainty, even as a child, too young for words, that someone had set her down in it and walked away and not looked back. The pack had found her at the border stones, blue-lipped and silent. Old Maddox had carried her in. Old Maddox was dead now. And the girl he'd carried had grown up, understanding the terms of her survival exactly. Be useful, be quiet, take up no room, and perhaps you would be allowed to stay. And tonight she had put out the fire. The door opened near dawn. She braced for guards. She got the Alpha. Lucan came in alone and pulled the door shut behind him, and the small stone room shrank around him the way every room did, because he filled a space whether he meant to or not. He did not sit. He stood with his back to the door and looked at her, and close up the wrongness she had glimpsed at the binding was far worse. The gray along his jaw was no trick of the firelight. It was in the skin itself, like a stain, rising from underneath. His right hand, when he flexed it, moved the way a hand moves in the deepest part of winter. And the cold came off him in a steady draft, a cold with no window to explain it, with a faint white smell, damp and still. "How long were you behind the doors?" he said. It was not a question. It was a sentence with the question worn smooth off the end of it. Long enough. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, and she hated it. Long enough to hear it would hurt her. Sabine. That binding her would pull her somewhere cold along with you. She swallowed. "I didn't plan what I did. I swear it. I only meant to put the fire out, so the binding would stop, so you wouldn't have to be the one to stop it. I thought, if the flame refused her, no one could lay it at your feet. I thought I could give you that and slip back to my coals, and no one would ever know. It was me." She ran out of words and looked at her unburned hands. "I didn't think about the part where everyone saw." Something moved across his face that she had no name for. "You unmade an alliance," he said slowly. "To spare a girl you have never once spoken to. I unmade a fire, Vesna said. You're welcome to relight it. I'll even show you how. It's mostly patience, and a great deal of blowing on things that don't want to catch. He stared at her. And then, to her complete astonishment, the corner of his mouth moved only barely, before the heaviness came down over it again like a lid. No one can relight it but the one who keeps it, he said quietly. That is the oldest law in the hold, older than my line. The hearth answers its keeper, and only its keeper. It has always been so. He looked at her hands again, and his gaze sharpened. And it answered you, Vesna. It went out because you asked it to. There is not a wolf in the north who could have done that, and you did it without knowing it was a thing that could be done. She had not known that he knew her name. The plain fact that he did frightened her more than the cell, more than the cold pouring off him, more than anything that had happened in the worst night of her life. They are saying you cursed the binding, he went on. Sabine's father has gone home insulted, which buys me a little time and a great deal of trouble I cannot yet pay for. The pack wants you punished. Some of them want you dead. He said it plainly, the way he might report the depth of snow on the wall. The only thing standing between you and that this morning is that I told them the flame's death was an omen, and that omens are the alphas to read, not the packs. They believe me, because it is easier than the truth, but they will not believe me forever. Why? The words scraped out of her raw. Why protect me at all? I know what you are. I know what's happening to you. I'm the one creature in this whole hold you should most want silenced, and the cells already have me. You could simply let them have their way. For a long moment he did not answer. Then he crossed to the bench and crouched in front of her, bringing those slate eyes level with her own. And she felt the cold pour off him in a wave, and beneath the cold, something she had not braced for. A kind of worn, thin, disbelieving hope, so quiet, it was nearly worse than despair. Because when you knelt in that circle, Lucan said, and your hands closed on the fire, the cold in me stopped. For the first time in a year, it simply stopped. Only for one breath. But it stopped, and I felt the difference the way you feel the sun come out from behind a cloud. His jaw tightened until the muscles stood out. I have had every healer, between here and the sea, lay hands on me. I have swallowed every bitter thing Orla could brew. None of it has touched this. And then a hearthkeeper I have never spoken a word to puts out a fire she cannot put out. And for one breath, I am warm. He rose, and the loss of even that small nearness made her shiver on the bench. So, you will understand why I am not going to let them put you in the ground until I know what you are. Vesna sat very still. A lifetime of being no one at all, and now the most dangerous wolf in the north was looking at her the way a man looks at a door he has spent his whole life trying to open. What I am, she said, is a stray. I never turned. I have no packmark, no people, no name. But the one a dead man gave me, my own kind, left me in the snow to die. Alpha. Whatever you think you've found, I promise you it is less than that. Your own kind left you in the snow, Lucan said. And the snow did not take you. Has it never once occurred to you to ask why a creature the cold could have had for nothing was the one creature it chose to spare? He went to the door. You're not going back to the hearth tonight. You'll be brought up to me after dark. There are things about this I would far rather you learned from me than from the whispers in the walls. And if I would rather go back to my fire and forget I ever heard a word. He paused, with his hand on the iron ring, and the gray at his jaw caught the lamplight and held it. Then you would be the first soul in this hold, he said, without turning, to ever choose to be far from me instead of near. They all want distance. You'd be welcome to it. He did not wait for her answer. The door closed, and the unnatural cold went out of the room with him, and Vesna sat alone in the dark, with her unburned hands, and the slow, dawning, awful suspicion that the worst decision of her life had not been putting out the fire at all. It had been surviving long enough to become interesting to a dying king. They brought her up after dark, and the woman waiting in the Alpha's antechamber was the last person Vesna had expected. Orla herself, the lore mistress, who had called the binding only the night before, and who now sat by a brazier grinding something grey and bitter into a bowl. As though halting a wedding with a fistful of ash were the ordinary business of a Tuesday evening. "Sit, child," Orla said, without looking up. "You've the look of a hare that has just heard the hounds. It's tiresome to watch. Sit." Vesna sat. The antechamber was warmer than any room she had ever been permitted into, and she understood why a moment later, when she counted the braziers, 6 of them, all lit, all roaring. And still the air carried that bone-deep draught she now knew came not from any window, but from the man himself, a dark shape at the far casement with his back to them. "You want to know what is wrong with him," Orla said. "Everyone in this hold wants to know. Precious few of them have earned the telling. You have, since you'll be sleeping in the next room, and I would rather you not wake the hall with screaming the first time you see the worst of it." She set down the pestle and fixed Vesna, with eyes the color of river flint. "What do you know of the Stillwood children's stories?" Vesna's mouth had gone dry as ash. "The White Forest, where wolves go when they die. The place beneath the frozen moon, where there is no wind and no bird song and the trees are too tall. My nurse used to frighten the little ones with it. Be good, or the Stillwood will have you." Your nurse was a fool, but she was not wrong about the shape of it. Orla's voice lost its dryness, which was somehow more frightening than any threat. "The Stillwood is real, child, and it is not only for the dead. Sometimes the dead are mourned too hard, and the wood reaches back along that grief like a hand along a rope, and it takes the living a piece at a time. A wolf bound too tightly to someone lost can be called into the Stillwood while his body still breathes here. His wolf walks there, freezes there, slow, from the ground up, and as the wolf freezes in that place, the man fails in this one." She nodded toward the gray shape at the window. "Look at his hand." "Then tell me I am wrong." Vesna looked. Lucan had not moved, but his right hand, hanging loose at his side, was the color of slate to the second knuckle, now darker than it had been in the cell at dawn, not bruised. Stone. As though winter itself were climbing him from the fingertips inward, patient as a tide. "It has been a year," Orla said. "When it reaches his heart, he stops. Garrick believes he is perhaps until the thaw. I am a great deal older than Garrick, and I would not wager on the thaw, and no one can hold it back." Vesna heard her own voice climb. "In a whole pack, in all the north, no one. I have tried everything I know, and I am very old, and I know a very great deal." For the first time, the sharpness left the old woman's face entirely, and underneath it was only tiredness. "Nothing holds the cold." "Nothing, child, but, apparently, a stray-born hearth-keeper who puts her hands into a fire and walks out without a mark." She leaned forward over her bowl. "You have never turned, have you? Never once felt your wolf rise in you? Not at the full moon, not in fear, not in fury. No, never. They called me banked, hearth-cold. Worse, when they thought I couldn't hear. And they were cruel. And they were also looking straight at the thing that may save their alpha and too stupid to know it." Orla sat back. "Listen to me. That stillness in you is not a lack. Whatever the pups told you in the yard. The Stillwood freezes what burns hot, and most wolves burn very hot indeed. But you were born in the snow and kept your own warmth, banked low and steady your entire life, the way you keep that great fire low and steady through the longest night, never letting it roar and never letting it die. You do not blaze, Vesna. You hold, and the Stillwood, when it reaches into you, finds nothing it knows how to take." She gathered her bowl and rose with a creak of old joints. "Which is precisely why, beginning tonight, you are going to go where it is and stand in it and not freeze." "I'm going to do what?" "Stay near him through the dark hours," Orla said, "and keep the cold from climbing while I bend every old book I own to finding a way to cut the tether." It is not improper before your face does that. He will not lay a hand on you. He is far too busy dying and far too proud to want any living witness to it. Think of it as tending one more fire that is trying to go out. She moved to the door, then paused. Only this fire will talk back, and it will talk back badly. He is poor company, at the best of hours. And these are not the best of hours. Do not take it to heart. And then she was gone, and it was only Vesna and the Alpha and 6 roaring braziers that did precisely nothing against the cold in the room. Lucan turned from the window at last. You can refuse, he said. I want that said plainly. Now that Orla has gone and cannot bully you, no one will force you into a dying man's rooms. If you wish to go back to your hearth, I will send you there tonight, and I will keep the pack off your throat as long as I am able. Which is not very long, Vesna said, by the sound of it. His mouth did the thing again, the almost movement, that was not quite a smile, and seemed to cost him something. No, he admitted. Not very long. I would not insult you with a lie about that. Of all things, she should have been afraid. She was afraid. But she had spent her whole life keeping things from going out, coaxing dying embers, shielding small flames from the draft with her own cupped body. And there was a man in front of her going out by the inch, and the wrongness of it pulled at something in her older and deeper than fear. She crossed to the nearest brazier, the keeper, in her unable to help itself, and shifted the coals so they would burn slower and longer through the night, and she felt his eyes on her hands the entire time. There is a pallet through that door, he said, nodding to the inner room, and a stone by the fire. Warm it before you sleep. You'll want it against you. The cold reaches the next room by midnight, and it does not care whose dreams it spoils. It took her a moment to understand what he had told her. He had set a warming stone by the brazier. For her, the dying Alpha of Frostmere, who could not warm so much as his own right hand, had quietly seen to it that she would have something to hold. She did not have the first idea what to do with that, so she said only, "Thank you," and he looked sharply away, as though she had caught him doing something shameful. She banked the braziers low and steady. She warmed the stone in the coals and carried it through. She lay down on the narrow pallet in the inner room, with the heat of it pressed against her chest, and she listened to him moving in the dark beyond the door, the restless, ceaseless sound of a man whose body would not let him be still, because to be still was to drift, and to drift was to wake in the wood. She stared at the rafters and tried very hard not to notice how easily the worst night of her life had folded itself into the safest she had felt in years. She must have slept, because the cold woke her. It came up through the floor, through the stone of the pallet, through her own banked warmth, a cold with a smell to it, damp and white and silent, and for one heartbeat, between sleeping and waking, Vesna was not in the inner room at all. She stood on snow that took no print of her foot, beneath a flat white moon in a sky with no stars, and the trees around her were too tall and too still, and something out in the silence was waiting for her to look at it. Then she was awake, gasping, bolt upright on the pallet with frost on her own breath, and through the door she could hear the Alpha of Frostmere saying his brother's name into the dark, to no one at all. "Bram," he said. "Bram, I'm coming back for you. Hold on, I'm coming." Vesna was through the door before she had decided to move her feet. The inner fire had burned itself low while she slept, and the Alpha's chamber had become a country of ice. Frost had spread across the floor in a slow, white tide, crawling outward from the great bed where Lucan lay rigid on his back, his hands fisted in the furs, his head turned sharply to one side, his whole body gone the dull gray of the thing that climbed his arm. He was not asleep. There was no rest in it anywhere. His chest heaved, as though he were hauling a weight up a hill. He was somewhere else, and the somewhere was killing him, and the name he kept saying broke clean down the middle every time he said it, the way a board breaks under too much snow. She did the thing she had been brought here to do. She crossed the freezing floor on bare feet that left no print. and she put her hands on him, one closing over his stone-cold fist and one laying flat against the gray that crept up his jaw, and she did not let go. The room fell away. She stood on the snow that took no footprint, under the flat, white moon, and the cold there was enormous, vast as the sky, a cold that should have stopped her heart in her chest, and it slid off her like water off oiled stone. Orla had been right. The stillwood reached into her and found nothing it knew how to grip. She turned, and turned again, taking it in the silence that pressed on her ears until they rang. The trees marching away in every direction, too straight and too tall. The moon that gave light but no warmth, and cast no honest shadow. And at the edge of the trees, half seen between the trunks, the shapes were waiting, patient, grieving, faceless, in the white between the wood. She did not let herself look at them for long. She was terribly afraid that, if she looked long enough, they would turn out to have faces, and that she would know some of them. She found Lucan in a clearing where the snow had been churned and torn as though he had been fighting it on his knees for a year, and the wolf was with him. She knew it was his wolf, the way you know your own face in still water. Enormous, dark, and beautiful, and frozen from the hindquarters forward, clear ice locking its back legs to the ground beneath it, white frost feathering up its flanks toward the great laboring barrel of its chest. It was trying to drag itself forward through the snow with its forelegs, and the snow would not give it up. And beside it knelt Lucan, with both arms wrapped around its neck. This was not the alpha of the wall and the council. This was the man underneath, stripped of every scrap of command and stillness. Just a brother kneeling beside a thing he was losing and could not stop losing, no matter how he held on. Lucan. She dropped to her knees in front of him in the torn snow. Lucan, look at me, look at me. Not the trees. His eyes were fixed past her shoulder on the dark beneath the wood, where one of the waiting shapes stood nearer than the rest. Smaller than the others, younger, hardly more than a boy. He went back over the frost gate, Lucan said, and his voice was a child's voice, now hollow and flat, and dreadfully certain. The Skarn were on us at the pass, more of them than our scouts had counted, and the line was breaking, and I gave the order to bring the frost gate down into the gorge. I gave it. And Bram was still on the far side with the rear guard, and I knew he was, and I gave the order, anyway, because if I had waited even 100 heartbeats for him to cross, the pass would have held and the Skarn would have come through it and taken the valley and everyone in it. His arms tightened on the frozen wolf until his knuckles whitened. I traded my brother for the pack. I have done the sums on it 1,000 nights in this place. They always come out the same way. And here is the worst of it. The thing I have never said aloud to a living soul. I would do it again. Knowing his face, knowing the sound he made, I would give that order again, because it was the right one. And being right has not warmed me a single degree. And the wood knows that. The wood feeds on exactly that. I know, she said, though she did not. Not the whole shape of it. Not yet. I know. Come back with me now. You cannot stay here. You're freezing. Both of you. You and him. And staying will not thaw a thing. I can't leave him alone in the cold. His voice cracked apart. I left him in the cold once already. You're not leaving him. He isn't here, Lucan. He's gone on ahead where it's warm, wherever the good dead go, and this thing in the trees is not him. She took his face between both her hands, the way she would take the heart of a fire, and she turned him bodily away from the wood until he had no choice but to look at her instead. This place is not your brother. It's the part of you that has refused to set him down for a year, and it has dressed itself in his face to keep you here, on your knees. Come back, please, come back, with me. For a moment, she was certain he would not. The young shape at the tree line took a single step closer, and the cold deepened around them until it pressed like a hand, and the frozen wolf shuddered under his arms and made a sound she felt in her own teeth. Then Vesna pulled. She pulled the way she had pulled him out of the binding without deciding to. The way her whole strange life had been one long, stubborn refusal to let a fire go out for want of someone willing to kneel down in the cold and tend it. And the white forest tore across like wet paper held to a flame. They were back. The chamber, the low red fire, the heaped furs. Lucan came awake with a sound she knew she would hear in her own sleep for a long time after a single ragged breath dragged in all at once, like a man breaking the surface from under a frozen lake. He was shaking, great shudders that ran the length of him. The frost on the floor had already begun to retreat toward the corners of the room, and his hand, where she still gripped it in both of hers, was warm. She looked down at it. The gray had pulled back, not gone, never that easily, but lower than it had been. The stone color receded below the second knuckle where an hour before it had been climbing well past it. Where her skin touched his was thawing, color seeping back into it like dawn coming into a window. "You followed me," he said. He sounded wrecked, hollowed out, amazed. "You actually came down into it after me." "You were saying his name." She did not let go of his hand. "I could hardly leave you to go alone, could I? It's no place to be alone." He stared at her for a long moment in the firelight, and then he did the thing that undid her more thoroughly than the whole of the Stillwood had. He turned his warming hand over within hers slowly, and he laced his cold fingers through her warm ones, and he held on the way a man holds a rope thrown to him in deep water. He did not say, "Thank you." He had plainly spent every word he owned down in the wood. But he drew her hand against his chest, flattened it over the hard, tired knock of his heart, and his eyes closed. And there, in the retreating cold, the most dangerous wolf in the north breathed slow, and let himself go down into true sleep, because for the first time in a year someone had come into the cold after him. Vesna stayed kneeling by the bed long after his grip had gone slack, and heavy with real rest. She watched the gray retreat by inches and the color climb back into his face, and she felt the dangerous, forbidden warmth in her own chest that had nothing to do with any fire she had ever tended, the thing she had no name for and no rank to deserve, blooming there anyway quietly the way embers will catch when you have stopped expecting them to. She, who had spent her life making certain she took up no room at all, had just been held against a king's heart and had wanted, fiercely and shamefully, to stay. It was only when the dawn came, gray and thin to the window, that she noticed her own right hand, the one that had gripped his all the way through the wood and back. A single thread of frost, fine as a hair, had traced itself across the back of her wrist. It had not been there the night before. She was certain of it. She knew her own hands the way she knew her own fire. She turned her wrist slowly in the pale light and watched the frost thread catch and glint, and she thought of Orla saying the wood had nothing in her it knew how to take. And she understood, with a slow and certain cold that had nothing to do with the room, that the lore mistress had been wrong about that, or else had known the truth, and had not wanted, just yet, to be the one to say it. Vesna closed her fist over the frost, so the sleeping Alpha would not see it when he woke, and she said nothing. Not to him, not to Orla, not yet. A rhythm formed the way a fire finds its own steady burn if you tend it long enough, and Vesna, who had spent her life learning the moods of flame, learned the moods of the Alpha instead. In the mornings, she woke before him, or tried to, though she found herself lingering a little longer each day, watching the gray light find the hard planes of his face and soften them. She would slip out before the upper hall stirred and go down to the long hearth which she had relit on the second day with a great deal of patience and a little quiet weeping she told no one about, and she would feed the great fire and pretend, under the eyes of the whole hold, that she was only the hearth-keeper. During the days their lives did not touch, he ruled a pack that was fraying at the edges, and she tended a fire and bound the occasional burn, and pretended not to hear what the washwomen said when she passed, because they did say things. The stray who cursed the binding, the wolfless girl who shamed Caramore, and put out the sacred flame. She felt the weight of every look in the yard now, where before she had been beneath looking at, and she was surprised to find she missed being invisible. Invisible had been lonely, but invisible had been safe. Once, a broad-shouldered wolf named Thomas, whose cousin had stood guard at the binding, knocked her coal bucket from her hands in the middle of the yard and watched the embers hiss and die in the slush, and said, loud enough for the whole bailey to hear, that it was a poor joke to let a fire-killer keep the sacred flame. Vesna knelt in the cold mud and gathered what coals she could, and did not answer, because there was no answer that would not make it worse, and because she had learned long ago that the only way through a thing like that was to become very small and very quiet and wait for it to lose interest. She had been doing it her whole life. She was good at it. She hated, suddenly and fiercely, how good at it she was. They'll settle, Garrick told her once, falling into step beside her in a corridor with the easy grace of a man who had decided to be kind about it. Wolves are like weather, loud, and then over. He paused. Lord Carrowmore is the part I'd watch. He went home insulted, and insulted men with 300 spears tend to come back with a reason. The Alpha is buying us time. He can't spend. You understand that, I think, better than most. She did. She thought about it at night, lying in the dark a careful arm's length from a dying king, listening to the cold try the windows, but it was the nights that undid her. In the evenings she came up, after the hold had gone quiet, and she banked the braziers, and she warmed her stone, and she lay down beside him, and at some point in the dark, his hand would find hers across the cold sheets, and hold on, and the worst of the wood would let him be. He did not speak of needing it. He communicated, as he did everything that mattered, without words. A fur left folded at the foot of her pallet that had not been there the night before. The brazier already stoked when she arrived. Once a small clay cup of mulled wine, still warm, set on the chest by her bed, which he never mentioned and she never thanked him for. Because she had learned that thanking him for kindness made him flinch as though she'd named a weakness. You he said one night, out of the dark. She froze. I do not. When you bank the coals, some old tune. You've done it every night this week. A pause. Don't stop on my account. Her face went hot in the dark. It's a hearth song. The keepers teach it down the line. It's meant to keep the fire company through the long hours so it doesn't feel tented by someone who'd rather be sleeping. She picked at the edge of the fur. It's foolish. Fires don't have feelings. No, Lucan agreed, and there was something in his voice she had not heard from him before, something almost light. But the ones who tend them do. Sing the rest of it. So she did, soft and low, and somewhere in the third verse, his breathing changed and went deep and even, and she realized he had fallen asleep to the sound of her voice with no hand-holding at all, and she lay very still so as not to wake him, absurdly proud, foolishly warm, a girl singing a king to sleep in a freezing room and wanting, with a fierceness that frightened her, to do it every night for the rest of her life. That was the trouble, the wanting, because something had woken in her, too. Her whole life, her wolf had been a banked and silent thing, a coal that never caught, the proof everyone pointed to that she was less. And now, on the nights she lay close to him, she felt it stir, not rise, not yet, but turn over in its long sleep and lift its head toward him the way a flower lifts toward the sun. And on the days she did not see him, it paced. She grew restless in the afternoons, short of breath in crowded rooms, cold in a way the long hearth could not touch. Once in the yard, she caught his scent on the wind from across the bailey, and her whole body eased like a fist unclenching, and she stood there stupidly in the middle of her chores, breathing him in, until a passing wolf shouldered her and called her a name she pretended not to hear. She knew what it was. Every pup learned the songs about mate bonds before they could properly run. The pull and the recognition and the bone-deep certainty that one wolf in all the world was yours. But those songs were for wolves who mattered, for names and bloodlines and pack marks, not for strays, not for the banked, and the wolfless, and the left in the snow. So whatever this was, this ache when he was gone, and this ease when he was near, it could not be that. It was not allowed to be that. The wood disagreed. She followed him down into it 3 more times that week, and each time she understood a little more of its shape. The dead waited always at the tree line, more of them than there should have been, and she kept her eyes from their faces. The frozen wolf had not thawed. If anything, the ice had climbed another handspan up its flanks. And the small young shape that stood nearer than the rest never spoke and never came closer, but Lucan could not stop watching it, the way you cannot stop pressing a wound to see if it still hurts. Once she made the mistake of looking too long at the dead herself, and a woman near the front lifted her head, and Vesna saw the beginning of a face there, gray and patient and almost kind, and she wrenched her eyes away and did not sleep the whole next day for fear of seeing the rest of it. The frost on her own wrist had spread to a delicate fern of white across the back of her hand. She wore her sleeve long and told no one. 17 on the 7th night, she woke to find she had drifted across the bed in her sleep, or he had, and his arm was a heavy warm weight across her waist, and his face was buried in her hair, and he was breathing her in, deep and slow, like a man drinking. For one suspended moment, she let herself have it. The heat of him at her back, the steady knock of his heart, the shameful blooming thing in her chest that whispered, "This is what you were for." Then he woke. She felt it happen, felt his whole body go rigid against hers, felt the breath stop in his chest. For one heartbeat, his arm tightened, pulling her closer, helpless, before he understood himself. Then he was gone, wrenched back across the cold sheets so fast she nearly fell into the space he'd left. "Lucan, you can't be here." His voice came out of the dark, wrong, scraped raw. "Vesna, you can't keep coming back into the wood. I've been a fool. I've let this go on because it let me sleep. Because I am a selfish, drowning man and you are the only warm thing in the world. But I have seen what that place does and I will not watch it start to do it to you." She heard him stand, heard the frost crackle under his bare feet. "Go back to your hearth in the morning. And don't come back up. You don't mean that. It is the only thing I have meant in a year." And then, quieter, so quiet she almost missed it, under the wind. "Please, don't make me watch the cold take you too. I couldn't survive it twice." She lay in the dark and did not answer, because she had no answer. And in the morning, his rooms were empty, and a guard was waiting to walk her down to a hearth that had never felt so cold. The first day apart, Vesna told herself it was a mercy. The second day, the headaches began. By the fourth, she could not pretend. It came on like the wood itself was reaching for her through the floor of the world. A cold that started in the marrow and would not be warmed, a weight on her chest that made each breath a labor, and worst of all, the wolf. The banked and silent thing that had only just lifted its head, now paced and clawed and could not settle, keening for something it had touched once and lost. And Vesna, who had spent her whole life being told she had no wolf at all, learned what it was to be torn in half by one. The fern of frost had climbed past her wrist, now, pale and fine, halfway to her elbow. She bound it in linen, and kept her sleeves down, and tended her great fire with hands that shook, and she did not sleep, because every time she closed her eyes, she stood for a moment on snow that took no footprint, and she did not have his hand to hold there any more. She saw him once, across the yard, on the 5th day. Garrick and 2 guards half-carrying him from the council hall, his face the gray of old ice, his right arm dead to the shoulder now, and she had to grip the doorframe to keep from going to him. He did not look at her. She told herself that was a mercy, too. She was getting very tired of mercies. On the 6th day she went to Orla. The lore mistress took one look at her in the doorway of the still room and set down her pestle. "Sit before you fall," she said. "And take off that sleeve. You've been hiding something from an old woman, and I am too near the grave to be patient about it." Vesna sat. She unwound the linen with numb fingers, and Orla looked at the fern of frost climbing her arm and did not gasp, which was somehow worse than if she had. I followed him, Vesna said. Into the place the Stillwood, not once. Many times. I could go, because the cold has nothing in me to take. You said so yourself, but you were wrong, weren't you? It has this. She turned her arm in the lamplight. It's taking me too slower, but it's taking me. Orla was quiet for a long moment, her old eyes moving over the frost. Tell me about the place, she said at last. All of it. What waits there? What he does there? So Vesna told her. The flat white moon and the trees too tall. The dead at the tree line who must not be looked at directly. The frozen wolf that could not drag itself free. The boy who stood nearer than the rest and never spoke. And Lucan, on his knees in the churned snow, saying he had traded his brother for the pack and would do it again and could not forgive himself for either the choice or the certainty. Orla listened to all of it, with her hands folded and her face still. When Vesna finished, the old woman sat back and let out a long breath. I have read of the Stillwood taking the grieving, she said. It is rare, but... And in every account I have ever found, child, the tether breaks. The grief fades, as grief does, and the wood loses its grip, and the wolf comes back to himself, thin and haunted but alive. It is not meant to hold a year. It is not meant to climb a man to the heart. She tapped one finger against her crossed arms, frowning. Something is holding the door open from the inside. The wood is strong because he has made it strong. He is feeding it. How does a man feed his own curse? By agreeing with it. Orla's voice was gentle now, gentler than Vesna had ever heard it. The wood says, you let your brother die, and instead of fighting that, he says, yes. Yes, I did, and I deserve to freeze for it. And so, the door stays open, and the cold keeps climbing, because the only one who could close it is standing inside, holding the latch. She looked at Vesna's frosted arm. And now he has gone and tangled you into the same net, and you have done a very foolish thing and let yourself love him, and so the net is pulling you down beside him. You should never have followed him into that place. He was alone in it, Vesna said. Someone had to. Yes, Orla said softly. I rather think someone did. She might have said more. But that was when the cold came up through the floor of the still room like a tide, sudden and total, and the lamp guttered, and Vesna's vision went white at the edges, and then gray, and she heard the bowl slip from her own hands and shatter very far away, and she heard, from somewhere out in the corridor, a voice she would have known at the bottom of the deepest winter, roaring her name. Then nothing. She woke to warmth, which was how she knew something had changed, because she had not been truly warm in 6 days. She was in her own narrow bed in the room off the infirmary, heaped with furs, and a brazier had been dragged so close, it was a wonder the blankets hadn't caught, and sitting beside the bed with his ruined gray hand pressed to his own mouth and his eyes red was the Alpha of Frostmere. You're awake. He was on his feet before she'd finished blinking, leaning over her, his good hand hovering at her face as though he wanted to touch her and didn't dare. How long have you been hiding it? The cold. The frost. Orla says, it's halfway to your shoulder. How long, Vesna? Since the first night I followed you. Her voice came out thin. Since the wood learned my face. He made a sound like he'd been struck. He turned and looked at Orla, who stood in the doorway with her arms folded, and there was murder in it. You knew. I know everything eventually, Orla said, unbothered. I knew tonight, when she finally stopped lying to me, which is more than you've ever done. Sit down, Alpha, and stop looming over the girl. She has had a hard week being noble at you, and I suspect you've had the same. It's time the two of you stopped. Lucan sat. For a long moment he stared at his own dead hand, and then, in a low voice, with no command left in it at all, he told them everything. The Scarn coming down out of the high country in a year of bad hunting, raiding the border villages, taking what they could not grow. The treaty he had offered and the treaty refused, the march on the pass when every other door had closed, and the frost gate, the only crossing, and the scarn pouring through it faster than his line could hold, and the order he had given to bring the whole shelf of mountain down into the gorge and seal the road with stone. And Bram, his younger brother, 19 years old, and laughing, even on a battlefield, still on the wrong side of it, with the rear guard, close enough that Lucan had seen his face in the moment before the world came down. I have told myself 100 ways that I could not have known he would not make the crossing in time, Lucan said. It is not even a lie, I could not have known. But I have also never once been able to say that I would have waited if I had, because I wouldn't. The valley held 400 souls. He was one. The sums are the sums. His jaw worked. Every night, the wood shows me his face, and the faces of all of them. And they ask me how a brother could do it, and I have no answer, because I would do it again, and a man who would do it again does not get to grieve. So, I freeze instead, it seems fair. The silence after was long. It is not fair, Orla said finally. It is only old. There is a difference, though I'll grant you. It's hard to feel from inside the snow. She uncrossed her arms. Hear an old woman, both of you, because I will only say it the once. The wood holds him because he holds it. The latch is on the inside. No herb I own, and no spell I know will cut a tether that the man himself is gripping with both hands. That is not a healer's work. That is a harder thing than healing. She looked at Vesna, and the bond you two have gone and made is real and forming, whether you bless it or not, which means the latch is no longer only his to hold. You are tied to him now, child. If he goes down into the cold for good, you go with him. There is no longer a version of this where only one of you freezes. Vesna heard the words land, and watched Lucan hear them, and watched his ruined face close like a door. Then, it's simple, he said, and stood. She stays away from me. The bond can't deepen if we don't feed it. Orla, you'll find her a posting in another hold, far south, somewhere warm, somewhere the wood can't reach. That is not how a forming bond works, and you know it, Orla snapped. I won't take her with me. The roar of it rattled the shutters, and the frost leapt across the floor in a white sheet. And for a moment, the dying Alpha was every inch the warlord who had brought a mountain down on his own blood. Then it left him all at once, and he stood swaying, gray to the throat, and said, broken, I have already killed one person I loved by making a choice for the greater good. I will not do it twice. I won't. And he turned and walked out of the infirmary, on legs that barely held him, and the cold went with him, and Vesna was left staring at the empty doorway, with her frost-bound arm and her newly woken wolf howling in her chest. Orla waited until his footsteps had faded. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed with a creak, and took Vesna's frozen hand in both her warm ones. He'll be dead by the thaw, she said simply, and by the bond, so will you. Unless one of you is brave enough to do the one thing he is too guilty to do, which is to stop agreeing that he deserves the cold. She squeezed Vesna's hand. He cannot save himself, child. He has decided he is a debt that hasn't finished being paid. You cannot save a man who has sentenced himself. I have seen it 100 times in a long life, and it has broken my heart every time. And I am telling you now, so that it does not have to break yours. You should leave. Go south, save the one of you that can still be saved. Vesna looked at the old woman, and then down at the fern of frost, climbing toward her heart, and then at the empty doorway, where the warmest cold thing in her whole frozen life had just walked away to die alone on purpose. No, she said. No, Vesna said again, and the word came out steadier the second time, the way a flame steadies once it has decided to burn. I won't go south. I won't tend some warm little fire in some warm little hold and grow old, knowing I let him freeze. Because it was the sensible thing, she pushed herself upright in the furs. Everyone I have ever known decided I wasn't worth the trouble of keeping. My own blood set me in the snow and walked off. The pack took me in and let me know every day of my life that I was a charity they could withdraw. I have spent a lifetime making myself small and useful and easy to leave because I believed them, all of them, that I was a thing you put down when it got hard. Her voice shook but did not break. I am done believing it, and I will not become one more person who decided he wasn't worth staying for. Orla looked at her for a long moment. Then, to Vesna's surprise, the old woman smiled, a small, fierce thing, and there was something almost like pride in it. "There it is," Orla said quietly. "There's the fire that put out my binding." She rose. "Listen to me then, because it is the only useful thing left in my old head. You cannot pull him out of that place by force. You have tried and it lasts only the night. The latch is guilt, and guilt does not answer to strength. It answers to being understood. Go down into that wood then, but you will not win by dragging him. You will win by making him believe he is allowed to stand up and walk out of it on his own 2 feet." Her voice gentled. "I cannot cut his tether, child. But I have lived a long time, and I know that the thing a drowning man needs is not a lecture about why he ought to swim. It is a hand he cannot make himself let go of." She moved to the door. "He'll have barred his rooms. Take Garrick. The Alpha can refuse the whole world, but he has never once managed to refuse that boy anything, and I suspect he's about to discover he can't refuse you either." She found Garrick in the armory, and she did not have the speech she'd prepared, so she said only, "I need you to get me back into his rooms tonight." Garrick set down the blade he'd been oiling. He looked at her long sleeve, at the way she held her arm, at whatever was written on her face, and his jaw tightened. "You know what staying near him does to you. I can smell it on you. The cold's in you now. I know. And you want to go anyway. I know how it sounds." "It sounds," Garrick said, standing, "like the most sense anyone in this hold has made in a year." He almost smiled. "He named you a curse to the pack to keep them off you. Did you know that? Let them all believe you doomed his binding, so they'd fear you instead of hate you, because fear keeps a body alive longer than hate does. A man doesn't do that for a stranger." He was quiet a moment, the oiling rag forgotten in his hand. "I knew Bram," he said. "Everyone did. You couldn't help it. He was the kind that made a room warmer just by walking into it. When the pass came down, I lost a friend. Lucan lost the only family he had left in the world, and gained a reason to despise himself for the rest of his life." He looked at her steadily. "If you can give him back even 1 hour of sleep that isn't an apology to the dead, you'll have done more for him than all of us managed in a year." He reached for his cloak. "He'll roar at you. He may roar at me. Come on." The corridors were dark and silent, the hold long asleep, and Vesna's heart hammered with every step the way it had the night of the binding. Only now she was walking toward the thing she should fear instead of away from it. Garrick spoke 3 low words to the guard at the door, and the man melted away. And then it was only the carved door and the killing cold seeping out from under it. She went in alone. The room was a country of ice. The fire had died entirely, and frost climbed the walls now. And the Alpha of Frostmere sat on the floor with his back against the bed, gray to the jaw, his dead arm cradled in his living one, and he did not even have the strength left to be surprised. "You shouldn't be here," he said. It came out as fog. "I keep being told that." She crossed the frozen floor and sank down in front of him, close enough to feel the cold pour off him like a river. "And I keep noticing it isn't true. You don't want me here because being near me hurts you with guilt, but it's the only thing that's ever helped you, and somewhere under all that noble dying, you know it." She took his ruined hand in both of hers. "You told me the wood knows you'd do it again. Well, here's a thing the wood doesn't know. Neither would I leave you. I'd do this again too, every night. I would walk into that cold 1,000 times before I'd walk south and live warm and small without you. So we're matched, you and I, 2 fools who do the unforgivable thing again." He did not answer at once. His gaze dropped to her arm, to the linen wound around it, and something in his ruined face went terrible. "Show me," he said. When she did not move, he said it again, softer, and so she unwound the binding and let him see the fern of white frost climbing past her elbow toward her shoulder, and he made a sound like a man watching a house burn. "It's already in you," he whispered. "I've already done it. I've already started taking you down with me. You've already given me the first thing in my life I would fight to keep," she said. "Don't you dare call that a curse." She caught his cold face before he could turn it away. "I followed you into that wood because you were worth following. The frost is the price, and I have looked at it, and I am paying it on purpose with my eyes open, which is more than anyone ever did for me. So stop trying to hand me back like something you broke and can't afford." When he spoke, his voice was wrecked. "If I let this finish, it takes you with me. The bond's not sealed. We could still. We won't." She lifted his cold hand and pressed it flat against her own cheek, and she felt him shudder. "I've spent my whole life being left, Lucan. I am not going to spend the end of it doing the leaving. Let me stay. Let it seal. And then come down into the wood with me one more time. Because I have an idea, and I think it's been wrong all along that you've been going alone." For a long moment, he only looked at her, his slate eyes raw and stripped of every defense, the warlord and the king, all burned away until there was only the man, cold and grieving and tired, looking at the one warm thing that had refused to leave. "I don't deserve," he began. "I know," she said. "That's the whole sickness, isn't it? Stop. Just for tonight, stop deserving things, and let yourself be wanted instead." And she kissed him. He went still beneath it, and then he broke, the way ice breaks in spring, all at once, and from the inside. His good hand came up into her hair, his cold mouth warmed against hers, and the river of cold pouring off him slowed and turned and began, impossibly, to thaw. He pulled her against him, and she went. And the frost on the walls began to retreat. And what passed between them in the dying dark was, for the first time in either of their lives, freely and wholly given. There was warmth where there had only been winter. She had spent her life keeping fires for other people. She had never once been the thing that was warmed. It should have frightened her, how much she wanted this, how her heart seemed to know his before her mind had decided anything at all. It did not. For the first time in her careful, swallowed-down life, the wanting felt like a thing she was allowed to hold, instead of a thing she would be punished for reaching toward. And so she stopped holding herself back and let herself, at last, be his. When the bond sealed, she felt it happen. A thing slotting into place in her chest, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. He pressed his mouth to the curve of her throat, and she felt the bond bite down, gold and warm and sudden, and her wolf, the banked and silent thing they'd all sworn she didn't have, threw back its head and answered, and she marked him in turn without being taught how, the way you suddenly know a song you've heard only in dreams. The bond flared bright and whole and complete, and the cold in the room broke like a fever, and for one perfect moment, the alpha of Frostmere was warm to the fingertips, whole and golden and hers. He fell asleep with her heart beating against his arms wrapped around her like he meant never to let go, his breathing slow and deep and at peace. And Vesna lay in the warmth they'd made, and felt something close to joy. She had done this, she had given him this. The frost on her own arm had stopped at the elbow, and gone no further. The future, for the first time, felt like a thing that might actually arrive. She thought of Orla saying the latch was on the inside. She thought of the dead at the tree line, and the boy who never spoke, and the plan she had carried since the infirmary settled in her at last into something solid. Not tonight. Tonight she would let him sleep warm and unhaunted as she had promised, but soon, and not alone, she would go and open that door from the inside. She closed her eyes and let the warmth pull her down with him. She opened them, standing in the still wood, and the dead were already turning to look at her. The dead were already turning to look at her, and this time Vesna did not look away. She stood in the still wood alone. Lucan was not beside her. She had come down into the cold on the tail of his sleep, and the bond had carried her here whole into the churned clearing under the flat white moon. But the man she had sealed herself to was nowhere in the silence, and for one lurching moment she was a child again in a snowbank with the whole world walking off and leaving her to the cold. Then she remembered she was not that child anymore. That child had put out a 200-year fire with her bare hands. That child had told a dying king, no. "All right," she said aloud to the frozen trees, and her breath did not even fog, because the wood had no interest in her breath. "All right, where is he?" She found the wolf first. It was worse than she had ever seen it. The ice locked up past its ribs now, only its great dark head still free and straining. And Lucan knelt against it exactly as he always did, his arms around its neck, his back to her, his face turned toward the tree line where the boy stood. Except tonight the boy had come closer. He stood at the very edge of the clearing now, close enough that Vesna could see him plainly, and he did wear Bram's face, the face she knew from the way Lucan had described his brother without ever describing him, young and open and made for laughing. It was gray and patient and full of a terrible gentle sorrow, and when it spoke in Lucan's own voice, low and certain, the voice of a man reading out a sentence he believed was just. "You left me on the far side when the mountain came down," the boy said in Lucan's voice. "You heard me, and you gave the order anyway. What kind of brother does that? Say it. You've never once let yourself say it." "I know what I am," Lucan said into the wolf's frozen fur, and his voice was worn to nothing, a voice that had been saying the same 3 words for a year to a thing that would never accept them. "I know. I'm sorry. Come out of the cold and let me freeze in your place. That's all I've ever asked. Just let me take the cold instead of you." "He can't answer you," Vesna said, understanding it as she said it. "He can't ever answer you because he isn't the one you're really asking. You've been begging forgiveness of a thing that was built to refuse it, Lucan." Vesna crossed the churned snow and dropped to her knees beside him, and he flinched at her voice as though she'd appeared out of the air, which she supposed she had. "You can't be here." His eyes were wild. "Not here, not all the way in. Vesna, you have to wake up. I'm exactly where I mean to be." She took his cold face in her hands and turned it from the boy to her. "Listen to me. That isn't Bram. Look at me and hear it. Your brother is not standing in a frozen wood accusing you. In your own voice. That is you. That has always been you. You built a judge out of the person you loved most, and you have been kneeling in front of it for a year, waiting for it to sentence you, and it never will, because it isn't him. It's the part of you that has decided it isn't allowed to live. It has his face, because you gave it his face. Grief does that. It takes the ones we couldn't save, and it makes them into the thing we can't forgive." Her thumbs moved against the gray of his cheeks. "But look at him, Lucan. Really look. Is that how Bram looked at you? A boy who made a room warmer just by walking into it? Would he stand in the cold and tell his brother to freeze?" For the first time in a year, Lucan looked at the boy at the tree line not as a judge to be endured, but as a brother he had lost, and the difference undid something in him. His arms loosened on the frozen wolf, and something in his ruined face began, very slightly, to break. "No," he whispered. "No. He'd have," his voice cracked. "He'd have been furious with me. He'd have shouted the roof down and thrown something, and called me 9 kinds of fool for hating myself. He never once in his life wanted anyone to freeze." "Then that thing in the trees is not your brother," Vesna said. "It's your guilt wearing him like a coat, and you get to take the coat off him. You get to let him be what he actually was, instead of what you needed to punish yourself with." But the boy took another step closer, and the cold deepened, and Lucan shuddered. "It doesn't matter what he'd have wanted," he said, and the old flatness came back into him. "The sums, the debt. Wanting doesn't unmake it. I still gave the order. He still died. That's real. Vesna, that stays real. No matter whose face I put on it. What am I supposed to do? Forgive myself. Just decide? The cold is done. He doesn't get to walk out of here. And there it was. The latch. Orla had been right. Strength would never have found it. Vesna knelt in the snow that took no print of her, and she understood that she could not pull him out, could not argue him out, could not love him out. She could only go down to where he actually was, which was the one place she had never let anyone follow her either, so she told him the things she had never told a living soul. When I was small, she said, before the hearth, before any of it, I used to think they left me in the snow because they could see something wrong in me. That's what a child decides when she's sat down and walked away from. Not that the world is cruel, or that times were hard, or that grown people fail. A child decides she was left because she wasn't worth the carrying. And I built my whole life on it, Lucan. I made myself small, so I'd never be too much to leave again. I kept everyone's fires and asked for nothing and took up no room, because somewhere under all of it I believed I owed the world an apology, just for having survived a cold that was supposed to take me. Her voice shook. I know what it is to decide. You don't get to walk out of the snow. I have been kneeling in my own version of this wood my whole life. And do you know what finally got me up off my knees? He was staring at her now, the boy at the tree line forgotten. What you? A dying man who set a warming stone by a stranger's bed, because he couldn't stand the thought of her being cold, even while he decided he deserved to freeze. The tears came, and she let them. You thought I was worth keeping warm, Lucan, when I had never once thought it of myself. You looked at the thing the world threw away, and you saw something worth saving. So, I am going to do the one thing you have never let anyone do for you. I am going to look straight at the man who brought a mountain down on his own brother, the man who would do it again, all of it, the whole unforgivable arithmetic of it, and I am going to tell you the truth. She pressed her forehead to his. You are worth keeping warm, you always were. You do not owe the dead your whole life. Bram would not take it. Let him go. Let yourself up. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wood held its breath. The frozen wolf strained against the ice. Then Lucan turned, slowly, on his knees, in the snow, and faced the boy at the tree line, and he said, in his own true voice, not the flat one, not the judge's, I'm sorry, Bram. I would give anything. But I'm not gonna freeze for you, because you never asked me to, and pretending you did has only kept me from missing you. Honestly, his breath hitched. I miss you. Gods, I miss you. I'll come the ordinary way. In my own time. I'm going to go and live first. And the boy at the tree line smiled. It was Bram's real smile, the one Vesna had never seen and somehow knew, the one Garrick had tried to describe, and it broke across that gray young face like a sunrise, and for just a moment he was not gray at all, but golden and whole. He lifted one hand, not in accusation now, but in farewell. And then he turned and walked back into the trees, unhurried, the way you walk toward home, and the other dead turned with him, and the whole silent host of them went into the wood and did not look back. And where they passed, the trees were not white anymore. The ice cracked. It went all at once. The way the great fire had gone out, all at once. A sound like a lake breaking apart in spring, and the frozen wolf tore free of its prison with a heave of its whole dark body and staggered up onto four legs that had not held it in a year. It shook itself, scattering frost like water, and turned its golden eyes on Lucan, and lowered its great head to press its brow against his chest, and Lucan wrapped his arms around his own wolf and wept like the boy he'd stopped being the day the mountain came down. The still wood was thawing around them. Snow slid from black branches, somewhere, impossibly, in the place where wolves go. A bird began to sing. Vesna. Lucan lifted his head. The gray was going out of him even here, color climbing back into his face, his hands, his straining, living wolf, Vesna. Take me home. She reached for him the way she had reached for a 200-year fire, the way she had reached for every dying thing the world had told her to let go of, and she pulled. They woke in a bed, drowned in gray dawnlight, tangled together, both of them gasping, and the room was warm. Not brazier warm, not warming stone warm. Warm the way a room is warm when nothing in it is dying. Vesna lifted her head and looked at the man beside her, and his right hand, the hand that had been stoned to the wrist, lay open on the furs, and it was whole, and it was pink, and it was warm. And on her own arm, the fern of frost was gone, as though it had never climbed at all. The cold did not leave him all at once, and Vesna was glad of it, because she did not trust things that healed too fast. For a season, the gray still crept back into his fingers on the bad nights, the ones where he woke saying his brother's name, and on those nights, she only took his hand and hummed the old hearth song, low in the dark, until the warmth came back on its own. Each time it came back sooner, each time the gray retreated further, until a winter came when it did not return at all. They were bound before the long hearth in the spring, over the fire she had killed and coaxed back to life. And some in the pack still muttered that the alpha had taken a wolfless stray to mate instead of a high-born daughter of Caramore. They muttered it quietly, because Caramore had sent no spears after all. Lucan had ridden south himself, alive and whole and terrifying in his wholeness, and told Sabine's father the truth of what the binding would have cost his daughter, and the old lord, who loved his child more than his pride, had clasped the alpha's warm hand and called him brother instead of enemy. Her wolf came the following autumn on a night of no particular importance. No full moon, no fear, no fury. Vesna simply woke with the certainty that the banked thing in her was finally ready to catch, and she walked out into the cold yard, and for the first time in her life, she let go of the smallness she'd worn like a second skin, and she turned, easy as breathing, into a she-wolf, the pale silver of ash over embers. Lucan met her in the yard on 4 legs of his own, and they ran the winter woods together until dawn. 2 creatures the cold had tried to keep and failed. She never did stop keeping the fire. She said it would be an insult to 200 years to hand it off now, but she kept it differently after. Not to earn a place, not to be too useful to leave. She kept it because she was warm now, all the way through, and warmth wants to be shared. And there was a hall full of wolves who would come down cold from the mountain and find her fire waiting. And late on the coldest nights, when the wind came down the smoke hole and the whole hold slept, the most dangerous alpha in the north would find his way down to the long hearth in his bare feet, and lie down beside his mate in the red light of the fire she tended, and put his warm head on her shoulder, and sleep, easy and deep and unafraid, the way a man sleeps when he has finally been let up out of the snow.